Ave Maris Stella.
Hello and welcome back to Vatican II in a Year. This is your host, Father Matthew Schneider. I am a priest of the Legion of Jesus Christ and a theology professor. This is a podcast on the Starcrest Production Network at sqpn.com. Today we are on day 358 and we're covering Gaudium et Spes 82 on We Should Promote Efforts to Avoid War. Somehow I was about to say we're on day 82 instead of Gaudium et Spes 82. Mine sometimes works that way. If you want to follow along, we have a reading plan and more details at sqpn.com/Vatican or frmatthewlc.com/Vatican. Yesterday we spoke about the need to stop mutually assured destruction and the arms race to dedicate more to true peace. Today we're continuing chapter 5, the foster of peace and the promotion of a community of nations, and we're concluding section 1, the avoidance of war. The summary for today is that we build international bodies for peace, but peace depends on the attitudes of all, not just systems. Paragraph 82 has 4 subparagraphs, which we'll each read individually. A speaks about how the Church supports those working to build international community for peace. B, we should keep examining the best ways to find peace. C, we need to get to the root of attitudes to prevent war. And D, realism and hope in preventing war. Let's begin with 82A. In the meantime, efforts which have already been made and are still underway to eliminate the danger of war are not to be underrated. On the contrary, support should be given to the goodwill of the very many leaders who work hard to do away with war, which they abominate. These men, although burdened by extremely weighty preoccupations of their high office, are nonetheless moved by the very grave peacemaking tasks to which they are bound, even if they cannot ignore the complexity of matters as they stand. We should fervently ask God to give these men the strength to go forward perseveringly, and to follow through courageously on this work of building peace with vigor. It is a work of supreme love for mankind. Today, it certainly demands that they extend their thoughts and their spirit beyond the confines of their own nation, that they put aside national selfishness and ambition to dominate other nations, and they nourish a profound reverence for the whole humanity, which is already making its way so laboriously towards greater unity. This subparagraph is reminding us just to look for peace and to work with those, support those who want to avoid war. I think that's pretty straightforward. That's a pretty good goal to have, to avoid war. Obviously, we've already mentioned we want a peace beyond that, but this is a very good start. So, looking at this, we can also note that this is, this is commendable even for politicians. A lot of times, those with big burdens, those with, big followings in politics can have a greater voice. But they need to use that greater voice for good, for positive change, not for, getting people riled up to go to war again. And we have to admit that this is complex. There's no kind of magic bullet, let's do this and there'll be no war. No, that's not how human nature works. Human nature is more complicated, multifaceted, etc. And so we will have a tough path to go for. But this is a tough path that's still worth fighting for. It is still worth fighting for a world of peace. And for part of that, these politicians need to seek the common good, not seek to dominate their neighbors or random other countries either. Anyways, moving on to 82B, it is summarized as we should keep examining the best ways to find peace. B, the problems of peace and disarmament have already been the subject of extensive, strenuous, and constant examination. Together with international meetings dealing with these problems, such studies should be regarded as the first steps towards solving these serious questions and should be promoted with ever greater urgency by way of yielding concrete results in the future. So this subparagraph is noting the connection between different studies and analysis, the kind of academic things, and the practical political things. These shouldn't exist in isolation. Sometimes there's too much of siloing, keeping each one separate today, but they should work together. And so the church is encouraging those who have studied ideas for disarmament and thinking that they can still keep going in there, still keep studying. And they should collaborate with international organizations, with individual nations, to find the best ways to actually achieve disarmament. We can't just say, hey, we want disarmament, without giving any concrete way in which this can happen. Because if the one country just disarms and the other country doesn't, that's not good for that country. So you have to find a way, a method to do this. And that takes study, that takes analysis. That takes very smart people. Not my specialty, but I do know a lot of smart people who work in various different fields trying to solve problems like this. Don't quite know anyone who tries to solve this exact problem, though. Let's move on to 82C. We need to get to the root attitudes to prevent war. This paragraph is really going to remind us that we need to have everyone seeking peace, not seeking domination over neighbors. And we need to have all the attitudes fixed on peace to really achieve a lasting peace. C. Nevertheless, men should take heed not to entrust themselves only to the efforts of some, while not caring about their own attitudes. For government officials who must at one and the same time guarantee the good of their own people and promote the universal good are very greatly dependent on public opinion and feeling. It does no good to work for peace as long as feelings of hostility, contempt, and distrust, as well as racial hatred and unbended ideologies, continue to divide men and place them in opposing camps. Consequently, there is above all a pressing need for a renewed education of attitudes and for new inspiration in public opinion. Those who are dedicated to the work of education, particularly of the young, or who mold public opinion, should consider the most weighty task to instruct all in fresh sentiments of peace. Indeed, we all need a change of heart as we regard the entire world and those tasks which we can perform in unison for the betterment of our race. Sorry there about the last sentence. I lost my thought on the page and it took me a split second to regain it. So it was a little longer break. Here, it's noting that we cannot just rely on the systems to prevent war. We need to look at attitudes. Because international agreements of leaders, things like that, work only so well. If everybody in a country wants to go to war, wants to dominate their neighbor, what can the politicians do? Well, a politician can try and argue that's not the right thing to do, but they're going to lose in the next election. And people are going to replace them with a pro-war politician and go to war with that guy instead if they're so set on dominating and going to war with their neighbors. So, we need people to have attitudes of peace. We need people to not have attitudes of racism, attitudes of hatred, attitudes of trying to, make us all different. We need to work for the betterment of the one human race. We are all one human race. And it notes the special importance for those who work in education or public opinion to really promote the values of peace and teach those values of peace. That's an important aspect. Now we're moving on to the last subparagraph, 82D, and it talks about a realism and hope in preventing war. D. But we should not let false hope deceive us. For unless enmities and hatred are put away and firm, honest agreements concerning world peace are reached in the future, humanity, which already is in the midst of a grave crisis, even though it is endowed with remarkable knowledge, will perhaps be brought to that dismal hour in which it will experience no peace other than the dreadful peace of death. But while we say this, the Church of Christ, present in the midst of the anxiety of our age, does not cease to hope more firmly. She intends to propose to our age over and over again, in season out of season, this apostolic message. Behold, now is the acceptable time for a change of heart. Behold, now is the day of salvation. Here, the fathers of the council, the people who wrote this document, want us to seek an end of war, but also be realistic about how a total end and the end of all war is a little unrealistic, unfortunately. Original sin brings in these kind of attitudes where it's almost impossible to have no war. We can definitely work in a way that will reduce war, reduce casualties, but unfortunately, it's unlikely we'll have no war. Nonetheless, The church has not ceased to hope. She keeps hoping. Despite all these enmity, despite all the bad attitudes. And she concludes this paragraph by reminding everyone that it's now a good time to change your heart. Now a good time to have attitudes against war, attitudes for peace. Let's repeat that last slide. Behold, now is the acceptable time for a change of heart. Behold, now is the day of salvation. Thank you for listening to this episode of Vatican II in a Year. This is a listener-supported podcast that you can donate to help Star Quest produce it. Another great podcast at sqpn.com/give. You can give one-time monthly or join the Star Quest Patreon. Tomorrow, we will continue with the next paragraphs of Gaudium et Spes. That's paragraphs 83 and 84 on the value of the international community. This will start the last section for the whole year, for this document and for the whole year. Please join us then to learn more about Vatican II, which can provide a blueprint for the Catholic Church. If you want more information on the podcast, like playlists and a reading plan, go to sqpn.com/Vatican, frmatthewlc.com/Vatican, and Vatican SQPN on Facebook and X. There's also a Discord server at sqpn.com/Discord. That's for StarQuest. And on there, you'll find a channel for Vatican II in a Year. Amen.